Hey there, guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Anatomy Show. Today we are on episode 4, which is a continuation of our introduction notes. So hopefully this works out and you guys have a good learning experience today. But let me know if there's any problems. Just put something in the comments and let me know about it. All right. So last time we ended up with this. We talked all about the different organ systems of the human body. And I just wanted to show you, this is what some of those organ systems look like. So, here we have, of course, the integumentary system with the skin. We have skeletal, muscular, nervous system. These should all look very familiar to you. Of course, we have the endocrine system with all the glands, cardiovascular system sending all the blood vessels out throughout the body. And then we have the lymphatic system, lymphatic and immune. And you can see all those lymphatic vessels that pass through your body. A lot of people, like I said, don't really know about the lymphatic system, but it has a couple organs like your spleen, your thymus, are considered to be organs of that system, as well as the lymph nodes. We have the respiratory system, and you can see it's very compact. It's the lungs and all the passageways leading to the lungs. Then we have the digestive system and the abdomen, which takes up most of the abdomen, of course, and the reproductive systems down in the pelvis, and the urinary system also in the pelvis. So those are all the systems of the body. Okay, so little warm up. Just if you want to take a second and pause your video and look at these questions and think about them. And when you unpause, I'll give you the answers. Okay, so the organ system that includes the skin would be the integumentary system. The one that drains excess fluid from tissues would be the lymphatic and immune system. The pumps blood would be the cardiovascular system. Releasing hormones, that would be the endocrine system, and communicates throughout the body. This one's a little bit tricky. I was thinking nervous system, but you could have also written endocrine because endocrine also communicates, but I think nervous would have been the best answer. Um, the level of organization that is many similar cells working together, of course, is a tissue. Contains proteins and lipids would be the chemical level, because those are two types of chemicals, and made of two or more tissues working together, that would be an organ. Hopefully you did perfectly on that. So let's move on to the next thing. All right, so today we're going to learn all about the processes of life that are important to keep you alive. So there are several of these, and they're all really, really critical to know about. So the first one is called metabolism. A lot of people, when they hear this, they think, oh, somebody has a fast metabolism, a slow metabolism. They think about like food and being like, whether you eat a lot and can't gain weight, or whether if you look at food and all of a sudden, you get fat and you don't know how. But metabolism really is not so much all about that. Metabolism actually is all the chemical reactions in your body. So, wow, I cannot write today. All the chemical reactions in the body. So when we talk about, wow, hopefully you're listening and not just like reading this. Anyway, when we talk about metabolism, when we talk about these chemical reactions, there's actually two types. There's what's called anabolism and catabolism. And here's what's interesting about this. You may have heard of anabolic steroids. Anabolic steroids are steroids that people take to build up their muscle mass, like people that are trying to basically like cheat at growing muscles. So anabolism is building bigger molecules. Wow. Stick an L in there. Building large molecules. And so you do this all the time. So, like, for example, when you eat protein, your body breaks it down into amino acids. After you break it down into amino acids, your body has to take those amino acids and build them back up into protein. So basically, if you eat something with protein in it, your body turns those proteins to amino acids. The amino acids go around your body through your bloodstream, get picked up by cells where they get turned back into proteins through anabolic pathways. And so that's why people take anabolic steroids, is to increase that. Your body does this naturally, so you don't have to cheat. Catabolism is the opposite. It is breaking down. And this is what you are doing when you digest your food. You are breaking down molecules. So this is usually large molecules that you're breaking down into smaller ones. All right, so those are the main processes of metabolism, but basically everything you do. So for example, if you take a pill, let's say like you have a headache and you take aspirin, um, your body will metabolize that aspirin over time. And that's why after a few hours, you won't feel it anymore, because your body is going through catabolic processes to break down that large molecule in the aspirin and get it out of your body. Great. Responsiveness. This is just responding to your environment. So this is like really, really basic stuff. So basically, we say this is responding to outside, actually, or internal. It could be internal or external, but to stimuli. So, for example, if someone throws a ball at your head and you either catch it or duck, that's responsiveness. If you see a bear in your backyard and you flee the bear, that's responsiveness. If you see some food and you go and grab it, that's responsiveness. So, of course, you have to do this to stay alive. Related to responsiveness is this thing called movement. And of course, you know what movement is. It's going from one place to the other. So it can be movement of either the whole organism, right? So in other words, you can move from one place to another. So it could be you moving, or it could be parts of the organism. So for example, like it could be like moving your hand, or it could be moving substances inside of your body. So in order to stay alive, like if you just like froze and didn't move and someone brought you all your food, I guess you could like pretty much get away without moving, like if you're in a coma or something like that. But your heart still has to move blood around your body to stay alive. So if you stop being able to metabolize, guess what happens? You die. If you stop being able to respond to things, eventually you die. If you stop being able to move substances around your body, of course, you die. So basically, these are all the things that we need to stay alive. Sorry, this gets a little grim. The next one is growth. Okay, and of course, this is to like get bigger, right? So we're getting bigger, but we're also replacing anything that's dead. Okay. So, for example, if a cell dies, you have to grow a new cell. Your skin is constantly dying and falling off, and you're replacing it. So that's growth. Very closely related to growth is this thing called differentiation. And differentiation literally comes from like the term like to become different. So when you differentiate, this is where you become mature. Basically, you grow up. So if you think about it, like when you went through puberty, you grew, like you became taller, hopefully, but you also differentiated. Like you don't look like a giant child, hopefully, right? We're not born as babies and then just become larger and larger and larger babies until we're full grown. No, we also differentiate. So if you look at babies, they're like really soft and flabby. They're very much undifferentiated. So they have like, not only tiny parts, but very like not formed parts. They're kind of like doughy. And then we're kind of like baked bread where we're like crusty. Just kidding. But you get the idea. We change over time. And so this has to do with like stem cells. Like when you are first born, you have a lot of stem cells in your body that are going to become faded into different things. And so those stem cells differentiate into muscle and bone and blood and skin tissue, and you become mature or differentiated. And that's also why we find out it's really hard to repair things later in life. So, like when you're young, if you get in an accident, you get hurt, your body heals itself very quickly. As you get older and you become more differentiated, your body stops having that ability because you don't have those stem cells. They're just waiting around for jobs, basically. So you're already who you're going to be. All right. The next one is reproduction. And of course, this is like you think making babies, right? But it turns out that there's more to it than that. Cells also have to reproduce. So this would be making more both people, right? Making more organisms. Now, you don't have to have kids. Like, you don't have to have kids to survive. But you also have to make more cells, right? So those cells have to reproduce. And so if your cells don't reproduce, you can't grow or differentiate. And so that's very important. And then the last one on here is my favorite term of all time, homeostasis. I love this word so much. It is actually the password to get into my grade book and to get into my like credit cards. And so if you guys ever want to like ruin my life, just, go in and type in like my name and then type in homeostasis, and that'll get you in, because I love this word. It's crazy. And in fact, it's so great, it's got its own slide, which we'll get to in a minute. So this is just showing those metabolic processes. Basically, you take food in, it goes through a catabolic process where it's broken down, releasing energy, and then those little energy building, or those little nutrient building blocks, then your body takes and puts energy into them to build them up into larger things. So that's what's kind of interesting. It's like this really cool magic trick of metabolism. You take in food, you break it down to make energy, but then you put it back together to make more of you. So like, you know how they say you are what you eat? Literally you are. So there's like little pieces of like carrots and chicken and whatever else you've been eating that make up you, except you broke them all the way down into their basic building blocks and then put them back together. So really you're not like part chicken or part carrot, but really those atoms were in the things that you were eating. Okay, here are some marathon runners. Fantastic. Okay, and these guys are responsive and moving. When it gets hot, they start sweating. So that's how they respond to their environment. And they're, of course, moving because they're running a marathon. All right, so let's stop for a second. Here's another little warm up question just to stop and review. So pause your video, look at these, and I'll give you the answers. Okay, so here's the answers. The organ system that includes the skin is the integumentary system. Drains fluids was the well, you know, I asked these questions already, didn't I? That's, of course, the lymphatic system. And differentiation different from growth. Differentiation is becoming more mature or adult-like. Growth is just becoming bigger. And then when your body fails to maintain homeostasis, what happens? You die. If you can't respond to stimulus, you die. If you can't move substances throughout the body, you die. And if you can't metabolize substances, you also die. So basically, you have to do all those things to stay alive. All right, so here's homeostasis. I've been putting this off forever, but here it is. So homeostasis is defined, and this is like the textbook definition, as the condition in which the body's internal environment remains within certain physiological limits. In other words, this is keeping your body in balance, okay? So that's the thing to remember. Homeostasis is all about the balance, okay? You can think about this for lots of different things. There's lots of different things you do, like from blood glucose levels to your body temperature to how much water's in your body. So, like, go drink a lot of water and see how much you pee. You'll pee a lot and it'll come out really clear. Don't drink a lot of water and you won't pee very much and it'll be really super yellow. That's homeostasis. You're trying to keep the amount of water in your body in balance. Anyway, it can be disturbed by stimulus that creates an imbalance in the internal environment. So, in other words, normally you keep your body temperature nice and normal. But let's say that a stimulus, like you go out on a really hot day, all of a sudden now it can be like a real struggle for your body to keep your temperature homeostasis and it can get out of whack. So we draw this little graph, and basically it's like this. Let's say we were to graph out our body temperature. So there's our body temperature, and we looked at it over time throughout the day, okay? What do you think your body temperature is? Everybody always tells me 98.6, which it may or may not be. Most people really don't actually have 98.6, but let's just say it's 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if we were to graph this, you know, some people think, oh, yeah, my body temperature should be the same all the time. But if you've ever checked your body temperature, you find out it does not stay the same all the time. It actually, sometimes it's a little bit higher, and then sometimes it goes a little bit lower, and sometimes it's a little bit higher, and sometimes it's a little bit lower. But when we say it gets higher or lower, maybe you'll catch yourself at like 99 degrees. Maybe you'll catch yourself at like 97.9 or something like that. Okay. It'll vary within a certain range and it depends on what your set point is. But if you kept checking your temperature throughout the day, you would see it does change a little bit. 99 might even be a little bit high. It might be like 98.9 or something like that. But you get the point. Within like a degree or two, you have this. And this is called a dynamic steady state. And that's not on your test, but it's just good to know. And what a dynamic steady state means is that it's a steady state, like it's steady at the point in the middle, but it's dynamic in that it changes. So, like if you are sitting in class and you're not moving, your body temperature drops. Actually, this happens when you sleep too. And then when you get up and you have to start moving, all of a sudden your body produces extra heat. But what makes this turn happen? What stops us from just continuing to go up and up and up and up and up? And what stops us from going down, 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 down? That's a really good question that we're going to find out. But guess what? If you go outside, your mom might say, hey, it's, you know, cold outside. Like say it's wintertime. Your mom's like, hey, put your coat on. You're going to catch a cold. Do you really catch colds from being cold? And of course, you know, the answer is no. It's caused by virus, right? It's the cold virus. But what happens if your body temperature does drop down too low and you become hypothermic? You can get very sick You could catch a cold because now your immune system isn't working like it's supposed to. A lot of things could start to mess up. And of course, if you got cold enough, that could be potentially fatal. Like people die from hypothermia. So it's kind of a scary time. You don't want to end up down here. You would be very uncomfortable. Same thing. If you went outside and let's say you, oops, wow, I don't know how I did that. But let's say, your temperature goes up too high because maybe like you become dehydrated and you start to get like heat stroke, you start to feel horrible and eventually you can get sick and die from that too. So homeostasis is very closely related to disease. Diabetics have this problem. If we were looking at diabetics, instead of talking about temperature, we'd be talking about glucose, right? So we could just stick glucose in there. And this is true for all of us. Throughout the day, you eat, your glucose goes up, and then you fast in between meals, and then you eat, and then you fast between meals. So we could have totally stuck glucose in here and done it. But what happens to diabetics? They don't have any breaks here. So their blood sugar can go too high or too low because they have problems with insulin. So that's a big problem. And that's why diabetes is really scary. So here's showing you some people riding camels in the desert. And you can see how people have adapted over time to live in extreme environments. It's amazing. So anyway, in order to get this homeostasis thing to work, we need this thing called a feedback system. And basically a feedback system is just like a cycle of events that is going to send information about your body and monitor it and feed it back into a control center. And there's three parts called receptor, control center, and effector. So the receptor, of course, is going to receive signals. Okay, so it receives stimulus. All right, that's its job. We have a control center that, of course, is going to control. So it's going to make decisions. So this is like the brain usually. So this is basically going to make decisions about what to do. And then the effector is going to create an effect. So this is really dumb. Ready for this? Effector, effect. So there's a cause. There's something that's going to stimulate your body called a stimulus. The receptor detects that. It receives the stimulus. It sends that information to the control center that makes decisions about what to do. And then that control center sends the information to an effector that makes a response. So the receptor sends information to the control center. The control center decides what to do and sends signal to the effector. And then the effector sends a signal out or makes something happen that reverses, usually. We'll do this. We'll say changes the situation. Changes your body's situation. Okay. So, for example, you have temperature receptors in your skin that tell you whether you're hot or cold. They send signals to your brain saying, hey, it's getting pretty hot in here. And then your brain's like, oh, we can't have that. So the brain sends a signal to the effector, which would be like your sweat glands. It's like, hey, sweat glands, can you do something down there? And they're like, all right, fine. And so they make you sweat. They change the situation, and you should hopefully cool down. All right, so this is a map of that. This is much more elegant than what I drew. But basically, you have this stimulus. Something's happening. Um, the sensor picks it up, sends it to the control center. Control center decides what to do, sends the information to the effector, which produces an effect, and that effect feeds back onto the stimulus. So that's what we call this part over here. We call this feedback because it's going back to affect the receptor. So if it's hot outside, the effector will produce sweat, which should hopefully cool you down. Let's say your blood sugar is high. Let's say like you eat like a giant like ice cream sundae and holy cow, your body's going nuts. So you have all this sugar all of a sudden in your body. Your body has sensors in your digestive system and in your blood that are like, holy crap, And so then those sensors send the information to the brain. And the brain's like, wow, that's a lot of sugar. And so what it does is it sends signals out to your glands to tell you to produce a lot of insulin. That insulin feeds back by sticking that sugar into your cells so that your blood sugar doesn't go crazy. By the way, those voices are exactly how those parts of your body sound. I just want you to know that. So here's a great example. I love this one. Basically, this is comparing your body to your house. So let's say in the middle of the winter, you just decide to open the window because you just don't care. And so you open up the window and cold wind comes blowing in. Your room gets like super cold really fast. That cold temperature is going to be detected by your thermometer. And if you've ever noticed like the thermostat in your house that controls the heat has a little thermometer on it. It tells you what temperature it is. That's your receptor. That's the part that's detecting the temperature. When that thermometer gets down below a certain point, it sends a signal to the thermostat, which is usually in the same device. So usually in your house, these are the same thing. So there's a thermometer and the thermostat. The thermostat is what you set to whatever point on whatever temperature you want. So whenever the thermometer sends the information to the thermostat saying, hey, it's now colder than what you set, the thermostat's like, oh no. And so it sends the signal to your furnace. And you can, if you're actually in the basement or near your furnace and this happens, you can actually hear this like click. And actually you can hear it from the thermostat too. And you hear it like click on. And then all of a sudden the furnace will run and it'll start blowing hot air. Now, if you leave that window open, it's just going to keep running forever because it's like the battle of your furnace versus the cold air. And it's like, who's going to win? If it's a huge window, maybe the cold air wins and the furnace just runs forever. Maybe your furnace is like a superstar and it beats the cold wind and then it shuts off every so often. But that's it. But then if you shut the window, all of a sudden now the window's closed and everything breaks down. So when the window closed, the furnace will run for a while. Eventually the temperature will get back up to the one that you set and the furnace will shut off. And so you've probably noticed this in the winter. Your furnace is on and off and on and off and on and off. Guess what? Your body does this with sweat. So throughout the day, you're like sweating, not sweating, sweating, not sweating. And this is the reason why your clothes stink after you wear them all day. So even if you sit in air conditioning, you're like, oh yeah, I just sat in air conditioning all day. My clothes are fine. Take and get like changed into some other clothes and then come back and smell your clothes that you just sat in and they're going to smell nasty. And you're going to be like, ew, how'd that happen? You sweat a tiny little bit all day because if we go back a little bit, remember we said about how your temperature goes up and down and up and down and up and down. Throughout the day, you become like a little sweaty. Like, if you're sitting in a chair, maybe like the parts of your body in contact with that chair are like, oh, we're hot down here. And they start producing sweat. And so really grossly, this is why your underwear gets really, really nasty. You're welcome. Okay. And we compare this to the body on the right side. So imagine you're outside with that lovely jacket, and all of a sudden the wind starts blowing. You have cold receptors in your skin. They start going nuts, saying, "Oh no, it's getting too cold for us." They send that signal to your brain. Your brain is the thermostat; it's the control center, and it says, "Oh, I don't like this," and so it sends signals to your muscles that start contracting, and they cause you to shiver. Um, Believe it or not, you do this all the time. It's just that it's like so imperceptible to you. Like your muscles actually contract a little bit to produce your body heat all day, every day. So probably don't even know it. But yeah, you do produce like little muscle contractions to keep your body warm. Great. All right. So there's two types of feedback systems, and this is like the last thing we have to talk about today. There's what are called negative feedback and positive feedback. So negative feedback's job is to reverse a change. It's going to cause something to go in the opposite direction, and it works towards homeostasis. So this is really important here. Negative feedback is really good. It sounds bad, like you're like, oh, negative, I don't want any of that. Negative feedback works towards homeostasis because if we go back to our little graph, and I said we have that like set point that we want to stick to, and we go up and down and up and down. If we start this graph again, and let's say this is your blood sugar when you wake up in the morning, and all of a sudden you start like having it go up too much. You don't want it to keep going on and on and on forever. That would be bad. So let's say you eat like your Cheerios or whatever, and it keeps going up. You need to have something that's going to push it back down, right? You need something that's going to push it back down towards homeostasis. So that's what negative feedback does. It causes us to divert back down. So when you get up here, negative feedback's like, no, you're not. Get back down there. And when it gets too low, negative feedback's like, hey, get back up into that range that we wanted. So it's pushing against it. So that's why it's negative feedback. So this is kind of like in school when you're like, teacher's like, all right, guys, get to work. And you start talking. The teacher's like, I told you to get to work. And you're like, all right. And you get back to work. And then you're like working really hard. And the teacher's like, whoa, 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 calm down. You're getting too crazy. And they're like, oh, okay. And then, like we're always trying to keep you guys like in this like middle thing. You know what I mean? We want you guys like working, but we don't want you guys going crazy over your schoolwork. We also don't want you being lazy. So we give like a lot of negative feedback. We kind of correct a lot. Positive feedback works to reinforce the change. So in positive feedback, we would have the same situation, except as you're starting to get higher, positive feedback is like, keep going. And so you're like, all right, I'll keep going. And then it's like, keep going. And then like you keep going. And then you end up like way out of whack, which sounds really bad, right? This is very dangerous, right? Very dangerous. Okay. So positive feedback is really rare. We hardly ever see this. Negative feedback works for lots of things. So like if you think about this graph, we could write like blood pressure over here because you want your blood pressure pretty normal. We could write temperature over here. This could be a temperature graph. It would also work. We could write glucose. That would also work. right? These are all things that work with negative feedback. If we pushed any of those three things to this point, it would be really bad. So positive feedback works away from homeostasis, which is really dangerous and sounds bad, but we need it for a couple things like childbirthing and lactation. And this is so weird. Ready? So, when women have like babies, they start off with like really little contractions, and the contractions get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, and all of a sudden they peak and the baby's born, and then those contractions drop back down to zero or more or less. So like hopefully, throughout your life you're not just randomly having like massive uterine contractions, but during that childbirthing process you don't want to be like little contractions, because you'll never have the baby. So you need to like ramp it up. Is childbirth dangerous? You betcha, but it's really important. So we need to push it real good to make it happen. So childbirthing is important. Lactation is the same thing. Let's say you have a little tiny baby. The little tiny baby only needs a little bit of food, and then it drops off and goes back to normal. But let's say you have a bigger baby that's trying to breastfeed. As long as that baby's like, I want more milk, you have to keep giving it more milk. And then eventually when a baby stops feeding, it'll stop. And if you have like a really large baby, let's say you breastfeed a child until they're like, 2 years old, 3 years old, you need to keep making milk all the way up until the baby's done feeding, and then have the milk stop. You don't want to have like a little bit of milk and then no milk, and a little bit of milk and then no milk. That would never work. The kid would be breastfeeding forever. So what happens is that with positive feedback, as long as there's a stimulus, which in lactation is the baby feeding, as long as the baby keeps trying to get milk, you keep producing it. When the baby stops, it breaks the cycle because the stimulus is gone. So that's why it works. Blood clotting is another one. If you get like a little tiny wound, as long as there's oxygen exposed to the blood, you'll keep clotting. Once the oxygen gets blocked, the clotting stops. If you have a bigger wound, you'll produce more and more and more clotting until it's completely blocked and the oxygen's gone. And so this is why your body can both take little tiny wounds and fix them, and also break big wounds because of positive feedback. Blood clotting, also very dangerous. Lactation is really not dangerous, I guess, but usually these things are. You can think of a fever too. If your body decides that it needs to have a fever to fight a virus, it'll actually push its body temperature out of homeostasis until you get better and the fever breaks. So that's why you might notice your temperature keeps going up, and then eventually it'll break and you get better. All right, so this is showing you, this is pretty gross, but this is our positive feedback loop for childbirth. As long as there's a baby's head pushing on the cervix has touch receptors that send a signal to the brain sends a signal back to the uterus telling it to contract, and the uterus keeps pushing that baby into the cervix until the baby comes out. Once the baby passes through the cervix, there's no more pressure on the uterus and the contractions stop. There's actually a hormone involved with this called oxytocin, which is pretty crazy. But you can follow this. So like the brain's producing this hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin goes to the uterus, causes the uterus to contract, pushing the baby on the cervix. Pushing the baby on the cervix causes nerves to send signals back to the brain to produce more oxytocin, and it goes on forever. So this is why, like twins, for example, baby number 1 is born, and then baby number 2 is pushing down on the cervix. So the body's like, all right, I guess we'll do this again, and pushes out baby number 2. And then when there's no more babies, it's like, okay, we can stop. And that's it. Well, thank you for listening. Hopefully you guys learned a lot. There are 5 questions on the Google Forms for you to answer. And once you're done with that, that's it. Have a great weekend, and we will see you on Monday.